For more than 200 years, explorers, surveyors, and treasure hunters have crawled over every inch of Petra, the rose-colored city carved into the cliffs of southern Jordan. They have measured its facades, mapped its cisterns, and catalogued its tombs. And for 200 years, one building resisted every attempt to explain it: the treasury. It stands at the end of a narrow gorge, 40 meters of sandstone columns and pediments cut directly into the rock face, and it has never once given up a straight answer about why it was built or who it was built for. In the summer of 2024, a team of archaeologists finally cracked that silence open. What they pulled out from underneath the plaza was not a curse, not a monster, and not a myth. It was something far stranger. 12 people who had been waiting in the dark for 2,000 years, undisturbed by the millions of tourists who had walked directly over their heads. Getting to the treasury is part of the experience, and it is designed that way on purpose. Visitors enter through the Seek, a natural crack in the sandstone that narrows to just a few meters wide in places, with walls rising more than 100 meters overhead. The passage twists for over a kilometer, blocking out sound and sunlight until the canyon suddenly splits open and the treasury appears, framed by the cliffs like a stage curtain pulling back. It is one of the most photographed reveals on the planet, and it is easy to understand why generations of visitors assumed they were looking at the whole story. The facade is so elaborate, so obviously the product of enormous wealth and skill, that it seems impossible anything more significant could be hiding nearby. But the treasury has always had an odd contradiction built into it. Behind that spectacular front door is a plain, mostly empty room carved into the rock, with none of the decoration or grandeur of the exterior. For decades, this mismatch fueled speculation about the building's real purpose. Local legend held that a stash of gold was hidden inside a stone urn carved at the very top of the facade, and for years passing travelers took rifle shots at it, hoping to crack it open. The urn, of course, is solid stone. There was never any treasure up there. If Petra had a genuine secret, most researchers suspected it wasn't hiding in the parts of the site that everyone could already see. That suspicion turned out to be correct. It just took 2 decades and a very different kind of tool to prove it. The story really begins in 2003, when a team working on the left-hand side of the Treasury Plaza uncovered 2 tombs cut into the bedrock. Both were disappointing in the way that most Petra tombs are disappointing. They had been opened long ago, picked over, and left with only fragments of the people who were originally buried there. Petra had been inhabited, fought over, and looted for centuries after the Nabatean kingdom collapsed, and its accessible tombs had mostly been stripped bare well before modern archaeologists arrived to study them. Still, those 2 tombs planted an idea in the mind of one researcher in particular, Piers Paul Kreisman, an archaeologist who would go on to lead the American Center of Research, an organization with deep ties to fieldwork throughout Jordan. If 2 tombs existed on the left side of the plaza, it stood to reason that a matching set might exist on the right. Petra's builders liked symmetry, but for years, that theory remained just a theory, because nobody had a good way to look underground without tearing up one of the most protected and heavily visited monuments in the world. The breakthrough came from a far less dramatic source than gold hunters with guns: geophysics. In 2024, Kreisman's team partnered with the Jordanian Department of Antiquities and researchers from the University of St. Andrews, including geophysicist Richard Bates, to run a survey of the ground in front of the treasury. The original goal wasn't even to hunt for tombs. The team was assessing flood risk in the plaza, trying to understand how water moves through the area so that future flash floods could be better controlled. Using ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic conductivity equipment, the researchers sent pulses into the earth and read back the echoes. Solid rock and packed sediment produce a fairly predictable signal. A hollow space does not. As the survey progressed, the data on the right side of the plaza began to mirror what had been mapped on the left side back in 2003, the same kind of anomaly, in the same kind of location, at the same rough depth. It was the first hard evidence in 20 years that Kreisman's hunch about symmetry might be correct. Getting permission to actually dig was its own project. Petra is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the plaza in front of its most famous building is not a place where excavation happens casually. It took formal sign-off from Jordanian authorities, coordination with the Petra Development and Tourism Region Authority, and a plan that wouldn't disrupt the flow of tourists still arriving daily to take their photo in front of the facade. When the green light finally came, The team moved quickly, working through August 2024 with a film crew from Discovery Channel's Expedition Unknown, hosted by Josh Gates, documenting the process as it happened. Excavating in the Treasury Plaza is not like digging a hole in an open field. The ground there is a compressed mix of wind-blown sand, sediment carried in by flash floods over 2,000 years, and debris from centuries of human activity, a dense, layered crust that had to be removed centimeter by centimeter to avoid damaging whatever was underneath. As the team worked deeper, the tools became finer. Shovels gave way to hand trowels, then to brushes, then to the kind of careful excavation more familiar from a forensics lab than a construction site. When the crew finally broke through into open space, they weren't sure what they would find. Petra has a brutal track record when it comes to intact burials. Nearly every tomb ever opened at the site, aside from those two partial ones in 2003, had already been emptied by looters, collapsed by erosion, or scavenged over the centuries. The odds of finding something undisturbed, directly beneath the single most photographed building in the country, seemed almost too good to be true. They were not too good to be true. Inside the chamber, roughly 5.5 meters long, 5.5 meters wide, and just under 3 meters high, the team found 12 complete human skeletons, resting exactly where they had been placed roughly 2,000 years earlier. Nothing had been moved. Nothing had been stolen. Aside from natural shifting caused by sediment and the occasional flood, the room looked essentially the way it had looked the day it was sealed. Priestman later called it one of the most significant tombs ever recorded at Petra, noting that in the 2 centuries archaeologists have studied the site, nothing quite like it had turned up before. It's easy to see why. Petra had been picked over by looters for the better part of 2 millennia. Finding a room this complete meant that, for once, time and flood silt had done more to protect the dead than any tomb door ever could. What made the discovery unusual wasn't just that the remains were intact, it was who they belonged to. This wasn't a single monumental burial for one ruler or one high priest. It was a shared chamber holding 12 individuals. An early examination suggested a mix of ages, which immediately complicated the simplest explanations. This didn't look like a single catastrophic event, and it didn't look like a burial reserved only for the most powerful person in the kingdom. It looked like a chamber meant for a group, possibly a family, possibly a set of individuals connected by status, profession, or circumstance that researchers are still working to understand. The preservation conditions inside the sealed room were unusually good. Cut off from sunlight, insulated by the surrounding rock, and protected from the humidity swings and looting that destroy most ancient remains, the skeletons retained a level of detail that gives researchers a genuinely rare opportunity. Bone density, dental wear, and skeletal stress markers can reveal an enormous amount about how people actually lived, their diet, their physical workload, their general health, even where they grew up, through isotope analysis of the teeth. None of that information survives in a tomb that has been robbed or scattered. It survives here, in a room that stayed shut for 2,000 years. Researchers are now waiting on authorization to run ancient DNA testing on the remains, which could reveal whether the 12 people buried together were blood relatives and whether they connect genetically to other Nabatean remains found elsewhere at Petra. If that testing goes forward, this chamber could become one of the most important genetic windows into the Nabatean people that has ever existed, a population that otherwise left behind astonishing architecture but comparatively little written record of who they actually were. Buried among the human remains, the team also found grave goods, bronze and iron pieces, ceramic vessels, and other objects placed deliberately alongside the dead, a practice consistent with the idea that these individuals were being sent into the next life with something to sustain them. One find in particular stopped the excavation team cold. Resting near one of the skeletons was a ceramic vessel that, in the low light of the newly opened chamber, looked strikingly like the kind of aged, humble chalice fans of a certain 1989 adventure film would recognize instantly. The treasury facade above this exact chamber had, decades earlier, served as the filming location for the climactic scene of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, in which the fictional Holy Grail is discovered hidden inside the building. The archaeologists knew the coincidence the moment they saw it. Josh Gates, on camera, described the sensation as everyone on the team simply freezing in place. Closer analysis in the following days determined that the vessel was, more precisely, the upper portion of a broken jug dating to roughly the 1st century BC, a real, unglamorous piece of Nabatean pottery rather than any kind of ceremonial grail. But its resemblance to the film prop remains one of those details that makes the discovery feel almost scripted, a strange collision between a genuine historical breakthrough and 80 years of pop culture built around the same building. Beyond the novelty, that pottery mattered enormously to the science. Nabatean ceramics changed in style and technique over time, and specialists can often date a piece to within a few decades based on its shape, clay composition, and firing method. Sediment analysis conducted by researchers from the University of St. Andrews further narrowed the timeline, placing the chamber's construction and use somewhere between the middle of the 1st century BC and the early 2nd century AD, a window that spans the peak of Nabatean independence and power right up through the kingdom's eventual annexation by Rome in 106 AD. For a monument whose construction date had been argued over for generations, that's not a small detail. It's a real anchor point in a story that had mostly been built on educated guesswork. To understand why a burial chamber like this would be hidden so completely, it helps to understand what kind of civilization built it. The Nabateans are often remembered today mostly through this one building, but they were, in their time, one of the most successful trading powers in the ancient world. Originally a nomadic Arab people, they settled into the canyons of southern Jordan and turned a landscape defined by scarcity into the center of a commercial empire, controlling the flow of incense, spices, and luxury goods moving between Arabia, the Mediterranean, and beyond. Their real engineering triumph wasn't the treasury's facade, it was water. The Nabateans built an extensive network of channels, cisterns, and dams that allowed a desert settlement to support a population estimated in the tens of thousands, with gardens and fountains that would have astonished travelers expecting nothing but rock and sand. That same instinct for control and concealment appears to run through their approach to burial as well. The grand, public-facing facades carved into the cliffs were statements of wealth and power aimed outward, at traders, visitors, and rivals. What happened beneath the surface, in sealed, unadorned chambers like this one, was private, protected, and never meant to be found by strangers. The timing of this particular burial lines up with the reign of King Aretas IV, a ruler associated with a major wave of architectural expansion across Petra. Whoever these 12 people were, they lived during one of the kingdom's most prosperous and confident periods, and the effort put into protecting their resting place suggests they mattered enough to the community to be shielded from the same forces, floods, looters, and time, that erased almost everyone else who lived and died in Petra. There's a genuine irony sitting at the center of this discovery. The same flash floods that Petra's own hydraulic engineers spent centuries trying to control are very likely what sealed this chamber so effectively. Over 2,000 years, silt and debris carried down through the sea gradually raised the ground level of the plaza,